All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a look at a pretty popular book. I think a lot of people have heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah, definitely a classic.
Yeah, and when we were kind of getting ready for this episode, you had mentioned that it's really interesting, this whole idea of these contrasting father figures.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really struck me about the book. It's this central contrast between the poor dad, who represents kind of a traditional mindset about money, you
Hmm.
know, go to school, get a good job, work hard and save. And then there's the rich dad, who has a very different perspective.
So I guess what we're trying to do today then is figure out what are some of the key takeaways from this rich dad philosophy, and how can our listeners maybe apply some of these ideas to their own lives to improve their financial well-being.
Absolutely. I
Hey,
think that's the goal, right?
yeah.
To extract some of the practical wisdom from the book.
Yeah, so maybe a good place to start is with this whole idea of financial education.
All right, so the book really hammers home the point that financial education is crucial. It's something that's often lacking in traditional schooling.
Mm.
The rich dad believes that understanding how money works is the foundation of building wealth.
Which makes sense, but it's not something that's, typically taught in schools.
Right. Exactly. It's more about, getting good grades, going to
Yeah.
college, getting a job, but not necessarily about how to manage your money or how to make your money work for you.
So how does the rich dad kind of approach this whole idea of money working for you?
Well, a big part of it comes down to understanding the difference between assets and liabilities.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
This is like the cornerstone of the whole philosophy.
How does he define those terms? Because I feel like a lot of people kind of throw those terms around, but it's maybe they don't fully grasp.
Yeah, and he defines it in a very simple way, but it's really powerful. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's something that generates income for you.
Hmm.
A liability, on the other hand, takes money out of your pocket.
So
So like a simple example, your house could be an asset if you're renting it out and it's generating income, or it could be a liability if you're paying a mortgage on it.
or even like a car. Most of the time a car is a liability, right? It's costing you money every month.
Exactly. And that's a really important shift in perspective because it changes how you view your spending and your investments.
Because if you start thinking about everything in terms of, is this putting money in my pocket or is this taking money out of my pocket? Then suddenly your decisions around like what you buy and what you invest in might look very different.
Absolutely. And that's what the rich dad is trying to teach.
Yeah.
It's about thinking differently about money.
And then another big idea in the book is that like this whole conventional wisdom of like go to school, get a good job, work hard for a paycheck, the book kind of challenges that whole idea.
Yeah, the book argues that a paycheck is not the ultimate goal. In fact, it can be a trap because it keeps you trading your time for money,
And the rich dad really emphasizes building wealth through assets.
right? It's about generating income from sources other than your job, so you're not limited by the hours you can work.
So then like what are some examples of these assets that the rich dad really kind of highlights?
So he talks a lot about real estate, for example,
Okay.
buying properties that can generate rental income or that you can sell for a profit later on.
Yeah.
He also talks about businesses, starting or investing in businesses that can create cash flow.
And those are really interesting because I feel like those are very active ways of building wealth. It's not just like, putting your money in a savings account or something like that.
Exactly. It requires a certain level of um, entrepreneurship and risk-taking,
Hmm.
but it also has the potential for much greater rewards.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to this whole idea of like the rich dad mindset, which is like, it's not just about understanding the definitions. It's about being willing to take some calculated risks. It's about
Mhm.
being proactive about your finances.
Exactly. And it's about being financially literate,
Hmm.
understanding how different investments work and being able to make informed decisions.
So I guess for our listeners who are like, okay, this all sounds great, but how do I actually start? What are some practical steps that somebody can take to kind of begin to embrace this rich dad philosophy?
Well, one of the most important things is education, right? Start learning about different types of investments. Read books, take courses. There are so many resources available today.
Yeah, even like podcasts like this one, right?
Exactly. There's a wealth of information out there.
Yeah, but it's about actively seeking it out.
Exactly. And then another important step is to really evaluate your own finances. Take a close look at your income, your expenses, your assets, your liabilities, and see where you can make changes.
So, like, are there things that you think are assets that maybe aren't really assets? Like, maybe they're actually liabilities.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, that car that you think is an asset might actually be a liability.
It's costing you more than it's bringing in.
Right, or that big house that you're,
Mm.
struggling to pay the mortgage on, maybe that's not really an asset. Maybe it's a burden.
And this all goes back to that mindset shift we were talking about before.
Exactly. It's about challenging your assumptions about money and about wealth.
And I think that's one of the really powerful messages of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is that financial independence is achievable.
Yes. It's not just a pipe dream. It's something that you can actually work towards.
By shifting your mindset and by being proactive.
By taking control of your finances and making your money work for you.
So, as we kind of wrap up here, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question to kind of ponder. What's one thing that you consider an asset in your life that might actually be a liability? And what's one small step that you could take today to start building a true asset for your financial future?
Those are great questions to think about.
Yeah, thanks for diving into this with us.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.